Hello, today we're going to learn the 3 spots that are most important for you to dominate if you not only want to beat your games, but absolutely crush them and achieve very high win rates. Especially after the explanation for spot number 1, if you stay until the end of the video, you will understand the complexity of the game and what you really have to work on to be able to have extremely high win rates. And now, without further ado, let's have a look at spot number 3. As you can see here, 3-bet pots in position as the preflop raiser, exemplified here by button against cutoff, but this is also true for any spot in a 3-bet pot in position. Why are these 3-bet pot situations so important? Firstly, the pot is already relatively large, and when the pot is large, your mistakes become more costly. So the EV mistakes cost you more in EV, and you can easier win a stack from your opponent. So the more chips there in the middle, the higher the impact it is on your win rate if you play these situations well. And villains, especially the recreational players out of position, will not be playing these spots well, and therefore you should be playing these spots as much as possible. Learn your preflop ranges, and when you find them loose, do not tighten up. You should be playing at least as wide as the 3-bet ranges are in position. Do not miss out on these spots, especially against recreational players. If you frequently manage to play heads up against them in this situation and you study this spot a lot, your win rate will increase drastically. How are we playing this spot? I have a good news for you. Compared to the other spots in this list, this is comparably easy. As we are in position in a 3-bet pot, we are relatively frequently allowed to c-bet. Take this board for example. Some of you maybe will not know that you can close to range c-bet this board, even in theory. So by understanding this board, you will know that our ace-queen suited, even without the backdoor flush draw or the flush draw, is almost always allowed to c-bet either for 1/3 or 50% sizing without the need of checking back, as you can see here. Here's the solution for this spot, and you see the overall checking back frequency is just about 9%, and with all of our ace-queen suited except for the backdoor flush draw, we will always be c-betting. I will also remind you that, of course, given it's a range c-betting board, we are always, or basically always, c-betting the top of our range, which are aces, kings, queens, ace, jack, and so on. If this seems obvious to you, I will give you this tip. There are boards where you're obviously not range c-betting, even though you're in position, but please pay a lot of attention on how the top of your range is c-betting in position. And now let's have a quick look at the turn. Here it is. For the turn I have chosen the 4 of diamonds, and we still have the ace-queen suited without any of the suit that is on the board. What is your strategy on this turn, do you know? As always, first think about your range here. How frequently do you want to barrel? I will tell you this, now we're not barreling range, but we can bet at a high frequency here. But what about our ace-queen specifically? Do you believe this is a better check back or a better bet? I hope with this example to show you that these spots are not always as clear as they are, and this is why, if you feel like this is something you didn't know, imagine what else you can find out. So study them. I promise you, if you dominate these spots, your win rate will increase a lot. This ace-queen suited here is always a bet. I'm sure many of you would have checked this back at least some of the time. Understand that 3-bet pots in position are not sing raise pots, so the kind of hands you're using as a bluff are different than the sing raise pots. Let's have a deeper look into the spot, because again there's one other thing I want you to pay attention to. Here it is, overall checking back frequency 36.7% of the time according to the sim, but you see that our ace-queen suited, except for the spades again, is always barreling the turn. You will see the range other hands that are not always barreling, but again pay attention to the aces, kings, queens, jacks and sevens and ace, jack suited and offsuit. You see that these hands are always betting. Not a single time you are needing to check back your strongest hands to protect your checking back range. Understand this in 3-bet pots in position, what is going on, and if you understand this reason, you will likely improve very quickly. Always look how you're playing the top of your range when you're studying a spot. But now let's have a look at the second most important spot for you to study to crush these games and have a very high win rate. Spot number 2, single raise pots in position as the preflop raiser. So now the pot is small, and this is the heart of cash games. Pot small, big stacks, and still somehow with the strongest hands, we want to make sure to stack our opponent if possible. So this requires really complex strategies, and this spot is really important because it happens very frequently. So we're not only talking about button against big blind, but also under the gun, hijack and cutoff against the big blind. So the first question already I have with this situation on this board, do you know the correct c-bet size? Well, I tell you it's pretty mixed, so you could use any c-bet size here. And what about the betting frequency for this board, do you know? And what about with our specific hand, the 9-8 suited here with the gut shot? I chose this and not the ace-queen suited as an example because I'm sure in similar spots you will be aware that the ace-queen at some point would find check bags depending on the runout. But let's see with this 9-8 suited. How frequently do you believe you can c-bet this? And if yes, for what size would you c-bet it? As I told you before, you could use any c-bet size here, but what is surprising for many players probably is that it is a high check bag frequency already on the flop. So here 7.2%, 50%, but also the largest 75, 1/3, all good, and a high check bag frequency. Here the overall strategy for the board and for our specific hand, you see that the board requires about 60% check back depending on the sim, and all the sizings are used. So even overbet, which our gut shot was not using here, but 11% of the time 1/3, 10%, 50%, 11%, 75% pot bets, and 9% of the time you'd overbet. How is this humanly possible to come up with such a strategy? This is why studying this is important, and if you do not know how to study by yourself, this is why I help my students find a simplified strategy that is almost as effective as using such a complex strategy. And in the coaching, you will also get help on finding out what kind of combos it is better to check back and what it is better to c-bet. As you can see here, it's quite mixed, but there's a way for you to simplify this, I promise. But now let's have a look at the turn for you to understand even more why this spot is so important. So here the turn, again a 4 of spades, and we still have the gut shot, it's checked to us, and you see it only depends on you here. So you were in control about the c-bet size. If you find a simplified strategy with one size per flop, you have an easier time to study turns. So you don't have to understand what to do with the 8-9 here after small c-bet, after 50%, 75 overbet. If you simplify it to one size per flop, you have a little bit less to study on the turn. I've chosen the 50% size here on the flop for this example, but to be honest, I prefer 75% size on this flop. It's what I recommend usually. But after 50% sizing, do you know what the correct size is on the turn? You should look at the turn card, see whether something essentially changed on the board or whether you're really going for a polarized bet size, understanding whether you're polarized or not, whether your opponent is having many bluff catchers or not. It's really important for you to maximize win rate, and there's no excuse for you because you can study, you're in control, you choose the flop c-bet size, and then on the turn, check out the turn card, what does it mean for the ranges, and then execute. So here we are using very big sizes. We are going to be polarized. We are only using overbets, and then the question is just what overbet sizing. But then the second tough situation here is to understand what goes into our betting range and what into our check and back range. What do you think about our 9-8 suited here after we decided to c-bet it here? Do you think it's mixed or do we check back? We do 100% of the time basically, and this is quite tough. You are not required to always know. This is not what this game is about, what studying is about. You don't need to be the GTO nerd to always understand here the 9-8 of suited, except for with the hearts you need to always check back. But what you need to look at is how the spot in general is played. You see 250% bets, 175% bets, 125% bets, big bets. This is something you should recognize on this 4, that you check back and you bet, and then you get a kind of a concept what kind of hands at the flush draw are better to bet, that maybe the lowest straight draws, so something like 5, 6 is nice, but the cards between the 7 and the jack block your opponent's folding range. And then with this concept you can kind of start guessing whether your combo is probably better to check back or to bet frequently. But of course it's not about always knowing exactly. So if you thought this is some bet some of the time, no problem. If you thought this is always a bet, And if you use a 75% bet, then there really is work to do in these spots. And as I said, this situation in position, you in control, you choose the sizings on the flop. Take this into your advantage and also make sure you know the perfect turn sizes, not only the flop sizes. Lastly, please check out how you're playing the aces, queens, kings, ace, jack here as well. You see that they are mostly bet in position. Find out the reason. Please find out. I will tell you probably in spot number 1, but maybe think ahead a little bit. And if you're playing these and also know what you're checking back, then you will crush the rivers. And now let's have a look at spot number 1. Here it is. 3 bet pots out of position as the pre-flop raiser. So we are looking at small blind against the button, but also big blind against the button and all the earlier positions. So this is important to distinguish. Small blind and big blind have different ranges. Therefore, the strategies for each of these positions are going to be different. And this is part of what you need to study to understand these differences. For example, what is your strategy on this board here? With the ace queen, I'm quite sure many of you would bet or check. You know both are possible. So let's study this spot again and see why this spot is the most important spot for you to study on. Here you have the strategy overall for the small blind. This is the overall checking frequency of 38% of the time. Have a look with the ace queen, how it's relatively mixed. But what I want you to pay attention mostly on is not the ace queen suited, but the checking frequency overall, and also how you're playing your sevens, jacks, even aces. This will be super important, but first, overall checking frequency 38%. Keep in mind from the small blind against the button on this board. But now look at big blind and you see overall over 65% of the time check with our range on this frequency. So very big difference in the checking frequency between small blind and big blind due to the different ranges. Small blind having a linear 3-betting range and the big blind a polarized 3-betting range. Keep this in mind for you when you're studying the spot, that it is not the same. Okay? And now again to what I was saying before, I want to have a look at the top of the range more carefully when we are out of position here. So let's go first to the small blind, which had the lower checking frequency, and filter here sets, overpair and top pair. You see that we c-bet them more frequently than the average of our range, but still we are finding 25% checks, and see that with the sets they are checked even more than 25% of the time. So what is happening out of position is that despite a relatively high c-betting frequency on the small blind, still we need to put the strong hands into our checking range. Out of position is tough to play, and we have a disadvantage because we need to split our range. With the top of our range, we are not allowed to generally c-bet them always. We need to c-bet them frequently, but we also need to put it in the checking frequency in order to check raise when they bet. And this will be the same for the big blind. Overall, the checking frequency here is higher than the small blind. Therefore, with the top of our range, we're expecting to again see higher checking frequency. Look at the sets, always checking basically. But now if we do them together, problem about the top pair is a bit different because we're polarized 3-bet strategy. So we have some weak top pairs, so jack 6, jack 5, jack 4. But let's group them all together, top pair plus. You see half of the time at least we're needing to check those to, when they bet, be able to be check raising and check call. So out of position, the key difference between in position is splitting ranges, and this is something people play wrong, and this is what will make the best player. They will know how to split the ranges, they will know how population is playing to maybe make some deviations in it, but they will for sure know the boards that they need to aggressively check raise and put strong hands in the checking range to have the strong check raise hands as well and only bluffs. So not easy to play out of position. You need to know the combos and the frequencies that is good to bet and check raise. And many players are not playing them well, but you need to, because players are stealing blinds from the cutoff and the button. Therefore, you need to frequently 3-bet on the small blind and polarize on the big blind. Remember, pre-flop is already hard. And now let's see whether on the turn it is similar. But what I can tell you that already on the turn here as well, your opponents at 50 NL, 100 NL, they are not splitting ranges here correctly. They're going to be completely imbalanced. So if you're playing this spot well, you will have a great advantage over them. and your win rate will skyrocket. So this is, in my opinion, #1 spot to study. Out of position 3-bet pots. Don't be tight around the blinds. You should if you don't know what you're doing post flop, but if you know what you're doing, these are spots to be 3-betting much as well. So now on the turn, what does the 4 mean? With our ace queen, again, not too exciting because you out of position differently than in position that we saw in the first spot. You will probably intuitively know correctly that this, of course, as a check is fine. So the ace queen here is not the most interesting one, as even if you intuitively just basically always check it here, you're not too far off from GTO. Let's see the correct frequency, 70% check. So now let's focus again at the most important, because the splitting range is not only for the flop but also the turn. Look at the sets, 100% checks. Over pair and top pair, okay, they bet a bit more, but still if you take the top of your range overall, we are checking close to 36% of the time. So now as a quick tip, think about your opponent. Let's say they know this on the flop, they sometimes check the jacks or the aces, but once they see bet a strong hand on the flop, do you think they are likely going to all of a sudden be checking them 36% of the time on the turn? If you don't think this, use this to your advantage as a quick tip. And as a reminder, this splitting range out of position topic is important. I left it for the end of the video to reward you. If you made it until here, let me know. It'd be interesting to know how many of you are watching this still. Either way, please thumbs up this video, subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying. If you want coaching, my contacts are here in the description, as well as a 10% off link for GTO Wizard. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.